So to continue on pathogenic priming and ADE, I am concerned about that being a big factor as we progress with these medications, in the larger population as we move forward. And one of the issues that we've seen in the past from some of the research attempts to do an mRNA vaccine before was when either test subjects, whether they were animals or humans, when they were injected with the medication, they seemed to do okay. And then when they were exposed to the wild virus out in nature, whether from another person or, it's circulating in the population, basically what happened was the disease process became really intense. And in some of the animal trials, actually, animals died from it because their immune system, kind of went into hyperdrive, and their bodies just couldn't handle the cascade of events, the cytokine storms, et cetera. And so that's something that we can't really know from this short period of time that these injections and these medications have been available. So that is another concerning issue, and it's certainly a topic that can be pretty easily searched for some of the older studies, but I feel like we're going to see some issues cropping up as many of the folks who have taken these injections get exposed to the circulating coronaviruses, because not necessarily SARS-CoV-2, but other coronaviruses can trigger that ADE response as well. So that's something to be mindful of when you're making this kind of decision for yourself and for your family. So let's move away from that subject for a little bit and talk about lockdowns, another controversial topic, and something that seems to be the main recourse for, quote, containing this virus. We've seen, governments across the entire world kind of jump on board with this lockdown idea. And I have read a lot of studies to their discredit, essentially, to the effectiveness of doing mass lockdowns. And never before has this been a recourse in any sort of epidemic that we've experienced in our past. So that in and of itself is pretty telling. And in fact, the CDC's data and the WHO, they did not have lockdowns as one of their courses of action for any sort of epidemic experience. That wasn't part of the plan, essentially, until last year. So the problem I have with it, among many, I'm going to discuss many of the problems I have with it, actually, and I think most of this is data supported. The majority of it is, and there's many, many, many research studies showing the ill effects that we're causing from the measures taken against this virus. And unfortunately, in my opinion, based on a lot of the research I've been doing and the data I've read, the measures themselves have really caused the greatest harm. And we have some comparative situations with certain countries that didn't take major lockdown measures, and a few states that limited and minimized their kind of authoritarian control of the population. And they actually fared pretty comparably to the rest of the other nations or other states that took more extreme measures. And so I think that's really important to factor in. And then also, because I'm certainly not a COVID denier, and I'm certainly not, of the mindset to let her rip and just let everybody fall ill, we definitely need to take measures to protect the vulnerable amongst our population. And as I've mentioned before, to kind of address the underlying issues of health and disease in our population, especially here in the United States. I think that's a big factor that's made us more vulnerable And also, the planetary issues that we're facing, whether it's toxicity of our environments because of, pesticide use and big agriculture, the poor nutritional status of many human beings these days, and, lack of mobility, lack of physical exercise, lack of time out in nature, lack of human connection. All of those things play a big role to kind of the undercurrent of this, the fallout of this pandemic and its subsequent measures. So, in my opinion, the lockdown measures have not been about public health. If they were, there would have been a lot of data supporting their efficacy, and there hasn't been. In fact, much of the data that's emerged over time as we've had this year to unfold has been the opposite. And so if it were about public health, then it would be kind of a broader view of the health of our entire community and our population, but it's become this kind of single focus, just deal with the virus itself, but not look at all the consequences that those measures have caused in our population and to the public health. So we've seen an increase in suicides, in domestic violence, in poverty and homelessness, in starvation, unfortunately. We've seen an increase in deaths from all-cause mortality. We've seen people delay important treatments and, like cancer treatment and exams that were relevant to those, to helping them have better health. We've seen people avoid going to the hospital for heart attacks and strokes and then subsequently die because of them. We've seen increases in depression and anxiety, and we've seen huge increases in overdoses and addiction problems. And then we've actually, and this is probably one of the most devastating things in my opinion, we've seen deaths from loneliness and despair, and our elders have been kind of cast away and left to die alone. And I find that absolutely unconscionable and really just a complete disservice to our human nature and the importance of life and death and these cycles of life. We must change that pattern and figure out a way to support each other as human beings and to love one another and to be there for people during these challenging times of transition from life to death. And then obviously the huge effects on our younger generation. I am so distraught by what I've seen in my patients who are younger, teenagers. They've really been struggling, and just watching this happen in our community. Kids who are isolated. I mean, my own kids have fared pretty well, but it's still taking a big toll on them. And I'm grateful that they, have the support they need and they're resilient human beings, but it's still, withered away at them a little bit as well. And we are seeing that just in a ubiquitous fashion, the damage this is doing to our youth. And they are our future generation. I mean, they're the ones who are going to turn this ship around. And we should be doing everything we can to support their health and longevity, because they're the future, literally, of our planet, and we need them to thrive. So that is just really heart-wrenching to me, and I don't feel like these measures have had any sort of benefit aside from possibly in the first few weeks when we were really supposed to just take the 15 days to flatten the curve, right? I do feel like at that time we didn't know enough. It was new. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of concern. And then pretty soon thereafter, we started to see the reality of the situation. And of course it was affecting people's lives and people were dying, but the population that was at risk were the elders and people with underlying conditions for the most part. They were certainly not our children. And, to have schools just now reopening in some places and some places still not is absolutely devastating to me and to those children that are affected. So sadly, I think the fallout of these types of measures are really going to be with us for a long time, and we're going to continue to see the negative effects that they've had on our population. So, and then just to touch on one of the things that's been challenging for me to kind of understand and to just almost to have to embrace is the fact that things have become so polarized and so essentially and so politicized, So I think that it's such a nuanced issue. Health always is, and public health even more so, because we're talking about a bigger picture of things. And I have found that when I've been speaking out, and I'm willing to do that because I think it's really too important of an issue to not. But I have found that people make assumptions about me or anybody else that speaks out about certain things. And they presume, that because I'm an advocate for freedom and, the freedom to move about and to operate our businesses and to be in community and to make adult choices for ourselves about our own health, that I'm somehow, in an extreme right-wing type of camp. And I would beg to differ. I mean, we as human beings are very complex, and that's a beautiful thing. And so to be an advocate for human rights, and in this case, in my opinion, human freedom is one of the most basic and important human rights, does not mean that I wish ill will on people at all, and that I don't take these things seriously. I mean, I am a practitioner, I'm a mom, I'm a human being, and I want health and longevity for my family and my patients and my communities. So I don't find advocating for freedom and our rights as, any sort of selfish thing. I think that, in fact, to not advocate for those is hugely problematic because as those freedoms get whittled away, they become almost impossible to regain. And I'm afraid I'm concerned, I should say, that in 4 or 5 years from now, or even next year, potentially, a lot of people are going to wake up kind of and be like, oh my goodness, like I still can't run my restaurant, or I can't travel because I don't have a vaccine passport to show. And these measures have been taken kind of under the guise of the greater good and public health. But what kind of health are we in if we cannot live freely and explore and make choices about our bodies that are informed and between a doctor and patient kind of expertise relationship rather than a political government body telling us what we can and can't do in order to live our lives and thrive. And so that is just something that I think is really important to think about, and not just to assume that because somebody's an advocate for our freedoms and our liberties, that we're a hater of, a fellow human life, because it's actually the opposite, in my opinion. I mean, I'm advocating for people to live, and life is short, and so we have inherent risks by being human beings. Every single living organism is going to have some risk, and ultimately we are mortal, and so death is the end game. And I personally want to live really fully between now and then. So And I want to have the freedom to take my kids to different countries and to travel and to, to be an active and participative human being in this thing we call life. So I'd like to kind of finish out with just what can we do? What can we do, in empowering ourselves and empowering our communities and kind of moving forward? Because in my opinion, obviously, I don't think the vaccines are the answer. I mean, we've already heard from public health, experts that, even if we vaccinate a huge portion of the population, everybody's still going to have to wear masks, and they're still going to have to social distance, and they're still not going to be able to gather in crowds. So my question to that is, what is the point? If it's just minimizing symptoms, potentially creating asymptomatic carriers because they don't recognize they have symptoms and can still be infective and still transmit, then why would we need to have, this procedure done and have to show some sort of documentation that we had it? Because it's not changing the course of the epidemic, in my opinion. So what can we do? I have found that reconnecting with community is one of the biggest answers. People have asked me who kind of think similarly to me and have some of the same thought processes to this whole thing. They've asked, how do you not get distraught, and how do you keep going, and how do you not feel isolated? And the answer to that is I've kind of found my tribe, and it's similar to the tribe I've always had, and I've surrounded myself with even more people that, not just because they agree with me, that's not the point, but they are willing to listen. They're willing to hear what I have to say. And I'm willing to hear what they have to say, and we play devil's advocate with each other. I have an old high school friend who shows up on my Facebook page sometimes and asks me hard questions, and I'm so grateful for him. Even though our opinions differ a lot of times, we have this respectful and, passionate dialogue, and I think that's great because it gets me thinking, it gets me researching more. It gets me wanting to make sure I have kind of the information that I want to disseminate so that people can learn, and it makes me question things. And so, that's just one example of how we can collectively kind of come together and have these dialogues again, and the connection that we need as human beings. On that note, we are social beings, and I think the fallout of us being isolated from each other and being scared of each other somehow, that we might get sick from somebody, that we're inherently diseased, I think the fallout from that far outweighs the mild risk of, catching a contagion from somebody. So when I run into people, heck yes, I'm going to hug them if they're comfortable with it. And I'm going to hug them for a long time. We need that human connection. We need that physicality. We need that oxytocin to stimulate all of these, important hormones in our bodies to keep us compassionate and connected and loved. And I'm always going to advocate for that. I don't, public health policy is supposed to be a recommendation. It's not supposed to be law. And we also have to factor in the individual health in that. And I think so much of the rhetoric has become, I'm doing this for you, and I'm doing this for the greater good. And it's this kind of weird, altruistic, almost righteous place. And I don't find that to be true, because I think we need to take care of our individual health, just like, when you fly and the flight attendant says, put the oxygen mask on yourself before helping others. And I think I use that with my patients sometimes too, because the healthier we are as an individual, the healthier our families are, and ultimately the healthier our community is, and our society for that matter. Because when we get healthier and we make good choices for ourselves with our nutrition, with our exercise, with our time outdoors, with our human connection and our relationships, that radiates out to our community. And it's contagious, way more contagious than any pathogen that we might experience. And so, in my opinion, that is the answer, is coming together with compassion and love for each other and seeing each other from this place of reverence and respect, and curiosity, so that we can understand the perspectives of all the people that we interact with on a regular basis. And I think that it's contagious, like I said. And I think that when we come from a place of optimizing our own individual health, not only does that radiate to our families and our communities and our immediate society, or even the broader society, but it certainly impacts the planet. And we must get back in harmony with our earth. We need to get our hands in the dirt. We need to start growing things for ourselves and bringing our resources back to kind of that local collective way, because and kind of like restore the village, in my opinion, because if we're relying on resources from across the globe, then anything makes that vulnerable. And we saw it happen this year, didn't we? When transportation was shut down and, a lot of employees were laid off. We saw that vulnerability in our food chain. And not to mention the toxic piece of our food chain and kind of this industrialized agribusiness that's taking over. And that's not a healthy venture anyway. Those kinds of ways of farming, if you can call them that, agribusiness, are not providing nutritious food for us, which again circles back to that individual health. So I encourage you to take care of your own health, prioritize your own health and that of your family. And number one, it lowers your risk of any sort of pathogen, but it's certainly of COVID and the fallout of it. We know that vitamin D is one of the essential nutrients for protecting you against getting infected in the first place, and then also from the potential fallout of the disease and mortality. It decreases mortality too in some studies. So that's kind of a no-brainer. It's inexpensive, it's available, it's safe, it's well studied, it's relevant to other functions in our bodies, like decreases the risk of diabetes and obesity and cancer, and improves anxiety and depression, and mental health. It keeps our bones sturdy and strong. I mean, the ramifications of having optimal vitamin D are like amazing. So why wouldn't we do that? And it's so available and so easy to administer and supplement. So let's start taking care of our nutrition, because bare bones nutrition has been shown to really improve the outcome of people who have, contracted the virus and then had subsequent COVID. So let's do that, please. Physical connection, I already talked about. I think that's so important. Find your tribe and get physical with them, hug them and be with them, and share your experiences and your concerns and your heart and your thoughts. Get out on the trail. If that feels more, I'm not saying don't do things that don't make you feel safe. If you feel more comfortable with some space, that's okay too. Just find ways to connect with other human beings, and you will feel, that validation of who you are, and you'll feel that sense of normalcy and humanity once again, because that's really what it all boils down to. And then, sleeping well and sleeping regular hours is really very much important for our immune system. Breathing, And that's the ironic thing now that so many of us have to be masked. But breathing deeply out in nature in particular is very, very safe. We really don't see a lot of asymptomatic transmission with this virus, unlike some other historical pathogens that have come through where there might be asymptomatic transmission. There's been a lot of studies, there's been several pretty large studies that have shown very little, if any, asymptomatic transmission. Sometimes there's some pre-symptomatic transmission where people are about to get sick and then they might spread it the day before or something like that. But to assume that everybody's infected and passing this along without symptoms is really not the case for this pathogen in particular, this virus. So breathe easy and breathe deeply, and especially breathe fresh air outside as much as you can. Choose love over fear. I talk about that a lot. Fear is really damaging to many functions of our body, certainly our immune function, and turn off the news. Like it's a live stream of chaos and fear-based information. You can stay informed and keep your fingers on the pulse of things without having to be inundated with the drama of it all. So find a balance on that, and take a break when you need to. Get outside, move your body, convene with other people, have a cup of tea, whatever it is that makes you feel rested and rejuvenated. Take advantage of those kinds of things, and choose love over fear. I mean, we cannot live our lives in fear, because that's not living. And I really want people to choose life and living and freedom and getting after things so that they can be their best self. And that is ultimately what's going to heal us individually and us as a community and our planet. And advocate, speak up, use your voice. So much of what's happening right now is silencing and discrediting and just devaluing human beings. It takes courage to speak from the heart, and it takes a lot of gumption to say things that might be controversial, but that you believe in. Connect, find your tribe, find ways to feel supported in that, because you're definitely not alone. I have made some really cool connections this year that I never would have imagined, and I'm so grateful for them. And they have made me feel like a normal human being. And that's really valuable. And we all have that available to us. We just have to, that's why you have to start speaking up and talking about what's important to you and what you're concerned about and what you value. Because as you speak up, other people start to find you, essentially, and they feel the courage to do the same. So we all need those tribes around us. We all need the village. We all need our planet to be helping us heal, and we in turn can help our planet heal as well. So thank you for your time, for your feedback, for your open-mindedness, for your heart, and for supporting me in my endeavors here. And I just wish you all the ultimate livelihood and life and health and support that you need to thrive. So get after it, like I always like to say, and do the things that make you feel excited about life and passionate. Connect with others. And I very much look forward to seeing you soon and to speaking with you about more important topics as we move forward. Take care.